Not Safe for Work Romance, where authors take you behind the scenes in our little corner of the romance writing world. I'm Shane Sterrett.
And I'm Eris Adderley, and we write the kind of books that embarrass you in front of your relatives.
Our episode today, The Voices in My Head, Writing Styles 101, where we'll be talking about the different writing styles authors have, that term voice you hear writers talk about so often, and why these are both unique and important for every author. So, Eris.
Well, Shane, you enunciate so well. I need to up my game. I need to not just run all my sentences together like a drunk hummingbird. Okay.
Stop. That's not true. You have a very lovely speaking voice, and you shouldn't disparage.
It's something.
Okay. So our subject tonight, this is a little bit more, I don't want to say esoteric, but I think at this point we're diving a little deeper into the mechanics of writing than we have in previous episodes, where we mostly talked about ourselves or how we got into writing. And this is now definitely we're talking about the nitty gritty of writing.
We're getting down into the nuts and bolts.
Yeah. So
definitely the nuts with what we write.
Stop. Oh my God, stop.
It begins the punning.
Yeah, exactly.
No, it's not even a pun. I just can't hear the word nuts and be in any way mature. Like, it's not happening. I'm telling you, like, we get almond milk, and like I just say nut milk every time, and I snicker like I'm 13. I'm like, nut milk anyway.
Great.
I write really serious books, and then when I'm just a normal person talking, I'm just no way mature.
You've reverted to 15 years old.
Yes, I have.
That must make going to the store a whole lot of fun with you. Beef.
I'm belligerent at the store, so that's probably not my best working environment for all the immature jokes, but it happens.
Okay.
I don't like grocery shopping. I get very cranky. Anyway.
So I think, one of my thoughts going into this was that these are going to be the kinds of discussions that may be very interesting and intriguing for readers who aren't necessarily as deeply involved in the day-to-day, workings of what it is being a writer. And for some of our author friends who may be listening in, it'll at least solidify thoughts that they may have had, I think the thing that I'm probably most concerned about is that they'll say, well, that's not right. That's absolutely not what constitutes a writing style.
Well, then those people should chime in, other authors, if they would, like, seriously, hit us up on Twitter if you have other opinions about voice and stuff, at Romance Not Safe for Work, and tell us what's up, or on our Facebook page, because we want to hear from people.
Exactly. That's exactly what I was thinking is I'm interested to see if anyone comes back with any feedback and says, hey, that's my experience, or what I was taught find to be true is different than what you guys just spent an hour or so talking about. So,
sure.
So the voices in my head, writing styles. I would like to hear from you first. Define for me what you think. What is a writing style? What does that mean to you as an author? And at what point in your writing career did that even become a thing for you?
Okay, I shall refer to my notes, but I will try my best not to read them because it will sound very much like I am reading notes. I came prepared. I did homework on this discussion topic.
Oh my gosh!
I was very excited. Your topic made me very. I was very into this topic. I was gonna say stimulated, but I'm like, don't do it. I'm such a nerd. I'm literally gonna start with a quote, and honestly, I can't remember who this quote is from. I think it's for those of you who survived the 60s, a Seth Jane Roberts quote. If you know who that is, cool, you're a hippie. If you don't worry about it. The quote is, "Perfection is a state beyond which no further growth or progress is possible, and no such state exists." And I was thinking about that when I was thinking of finding one's voice, because I was like, well, how do you know you found it? And I'm like, it's kind of an illusory goalpost, right? It's like, how do I know? It's like once I think I found it, like then what? I don't develop anymore as a writer. Like that's it. I've hit the thing. This is the plateau. I'm not going any further.
Right.
And then I was kind of thinking about that, and I'm like, well, that's for me. I'm like, well, that's nonsense because I feel like we're always continually honing. We're always continually looking for a better way to write, to get closer to our goals of expressing ourselves.
Right.
And I was thinking, it's one of those things where you got like that graph of a curve, and it starts for the math nerds here. It starts getting closer and closer to zero, but it never actually gets to zero. Like I feel that's the finding your voice. Like I don't know if we'll ever get it, but like you're always trying to get closer. So I feel like I'm nearer than when I started out. But if I have no idea if what I'm doing now is quote my voice or
and
not.
Do you not feel though that your voice has also changed the longer you've been doing this? It's not as if you said, okay, well, I'm going to be a writer and today I'm going to find my voice. And you spent, an 8-hour day sitting at the computer and you're like, there it is. That's my voice.
I watched 3 YouTube videos that were exactly 14 minutes long a piece. And now I know what it is.
Right. It's always, and I agree with your earlier comment. It's always evolving. And I especially agree with, I don't think that any writer will ever find that perfect voice because I don't think it exists and say, well, that's it. I've found my voice and it's never going to change. And it's going to, across all novels that I write, every piece of writing I do, it will be consistent and fixed. And everyone who ever reads what I've written without even knowing who wrote it will know, that is Eris Adderley, or that is Shane Starrett, or that is Nora Roberts.
That's what I was thinking, is that like maybe maybe it's like I can't say if I have a voice, only someone else could say that. And I was thinking if someone else could write something in quote my style, whatever the heck that is, and then other people could recognize that, then maybe I have a voice. Like if someone could go out right now and write something in like the style of Edgar Allan Poe, and other people would be like, that sounds like something Poe wrote, or something Tolkien wrote, or whatever, then like maybe they have a voice. And I honestly don't know that I have that. I had put something out there under a pen name that was under a completely secret name for 4 months, and nobody popped up like, oh, hey, Eris, I know this is you. So I kind of feel like I don't think my voice is that distinct yet because nobody knew it was me. So
okay. But right, except that I would argue that when I compare your voice to other writers, to me, there is a very distinct difference. So I think in the case of Octavia and you, there was the difference in the names, okay, and I never thought to compare the voices per se. Whereas I have and I will compare your voice to my own writing, and I compare your voice to other writers, and I know that there are very distinct things about your voice that set you apart for me as a reader. Now I'm speaking as a reader, not as another writer, that I love. And I've said this. In fact, one of the very first things I ever wrote about you as an author was when I wrote a review and I said, this writer, and I don't think I even really knew you at that point, this writer has a distinctive voice and I love it.
Well, thank you. I mean, but that's to the point that I think maybe it's for someone else to judge.
And I would agree with that. I really honestly think that's ultimately what it comes down to, is that it's for our readers to judge whether we have a voice, a distinctive voice. And I think most readers would probably chime in and say, oh, yes, absolutely. You have a very distinctive voice and I love your voice. Or, I'm sure there are readers out there that would say, yeah, your voice really doesn't appeal to me.
And that is sometimes true. And that's how you pick your favorites. You keep going back for more. Which also, at least, like, how does one, as a writer, find one's voice?
Yeah, exactly. And it's very interesting that you brought that up, because what you just said is kind of where, without even having really thought about it until you just said it, where I really think it boils down to is you can't determine what your own voice is. You may want to. You may work towards a goal that you think is what you're trying to achieve as your voice, your style. I think ultimately, though, it is our readers who determine that.
Sure.
I I've told another author that we both know, who I love dearly, Jennifer Benet, that I can tell at a certain point in her story that it's Jennifer Benet, and
As
that's
opposed to a co-writer, you mean?
as
Like if she's
opposed to a co-writer,
okay.
or it is something that, just having read so many of her books, that I've keyed in on, and that is she has this. She does it in almost every book, where her protagonist or her heroine or her anti-hero runs their fingers through their hair in
Mm-hmm.
frustration. It's not like that's her entire writing style. Like, you can't tell anything about a Jennifer Benet book until that particular point. But it is a thing that she does. It's something that she puts in,
There's
like,
kind of some signature moves that you notice, and that's not
yes,
a bad thing. It's just you
no,
happen to notice that this is a thing that this author focuses on, or is it's a detail they like to include. Like I've noticed, for example, I've read quite a few of Jennifer's books, and I've noticed that she definitely always likes to include that the heroine's hair is getting pulled
yeah,
like a lot, like hard,
yeah,
and that's it. It's hot in the scene, but I'm making the point that that is a detail that
right. And that's all
then I
part of
know
her,
this is the book that I know who I'm reading.
right. And that's all part of her style. And when I mentioned it to her one time, she acted at that point. She's like, "What are you talking about?" I'm like, "Jennifer, you do realize that you have someone, whether it's Thalia or James or whomever, running their fingers through their hair in first." And she's like, "No, I don't." And I'm like, "Yes, you do." And then later on, she kind of copped to it and said, "Yeah, I guess I do kind of use that." And I'm like, "Yeah, that's part of your style. Part of, you know, we all have certain things that we key in on when we're writing, that we bring to the table, that we then incorporate in our writing, that makes that unique to us." Now, I'm not saying that no other writer ever does that particular uh, gesture, but it's unique to her, at
It's
least.
a thing that you can notice and feel
Yeah,
like, oh, this is a familiar thing. I am at home here. I'm comfortable. Like I know what
right,
I know what I've got. Um,
right.
I think
And
when we
and
oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, and as readers, when you read someone that you enjoy, you start to pick up on those little details, those things. Um, you know, with you, it is the way you use words that are so descriptive. Um, to me, that's one of the things when I wrote that review. One of the very first that drew me into your story was that the language was so rich, and I've always said that about your writing. You have such a rich vocabulary. Now that appeals to me as a reader, much so.
Yeah, and so,
It,
some
it,
people don't like I have that in my
I
notes for later, but yeah, some people not so thrilled about that. But
right, but that is part of your style. That I know we started off this episode with the voices in my head, and I'm not going to speak for every writer, obviously, but I hear myself in my head when I'm rereading or when I'm
Mhm.
writing. I hear that voice in my head. Um, and when I read you, I don't hear the same voice that I hear in my head when I'm writing for myself. I hear your voice
Do
in
you
the
think
same.
that's because it's just it's a foreign because it's like outside of?
I'm not
Hmm.
100% honestly sure
That's an
why.
interesting way of putting it, though.
Because here's the other thing, and I'm sure we'll talk about this later on too, is that when I'm reading another writer who I really enjoy, like yourself or Jennifer or Olivia Grant or Addison Kane or Myra, there are times when, as a writer, I go, "Oh God, I so want to, I wish I had written that, or I wish I had written that style that way." And we're going to talk about that because that gets into a little bit of a fuzzy gray area.
Yeah, I had I had some things noted about that because it just as far as the idea of finding your own voice, I was kind of
Right.
feeling like, when you get started, all you can do is kind of look at examples of other people's writing that you like and you can and use that as some sort of idea of what is good and work from there. Like we all got to start somewhere. You know what I
Right.
mean? Like when I
Exactly.
when I first wrote The Eighth House and it was still on Literotica, I got a couple comments saying that this reminded people of things by Anne Rice, which I'm not trying to compare myself. Like, let's be serious. But the comment made sense because I had grown up reading a ton of her books and I really loved them. So I'm sure that, like, in my subconscious somewhere, my head was like, this is what good writing looks like. And it may
Yeah.
not be everybody's cup of tea, but that I'm sure was like, a model for me of like, oh, this is enjoyable this way.
Right.
But I
And
think eventually, you're gonna like, if you keep going, you're gonna start, peeling back the layers of the onion and keep the things that are working for you and get rid of things that are just, this is just stuff you've been told to do as a writer, but maybe you decide, what, this is not useful to me. I'm comfortable with this process, blah, blah, blah.
exactly. Exactly. And I think that is important because I think that's part of what sets every writer apart from a different writer. And now, you know me, I love Hunter S. Thompson.
Hmm.
I would love to be able to write like Hunter S. Thompson
I
because
think
I
you'd
love,
have to do a lot more drugs.
well, it's not that I'm not willing to try. Okay. If that's what, no, but honestly, the difference is that while I love reading Hunter S. Thompson as a reader,
Hmm.
as a writer, I've tried to mimic him on occasion, like in posts and in other things, and make myself I can't make myself write like Hunter S. Thompson because I don't have that voice in my head.
And you're not, it's like each of us is comprised of a million different ingredients of our own personal histories and emotional baggage and experiences. And it's like you're not gonna be able to, you can only write like you, but in the beginning, you don't know what the hell that is.
Exactly.
So you just
Yeah,
gotta like, do what you can do until you start chipping away what isn't you and then what is. I only think the only place is that where we have to maintain some self-awareness as writers is not to get to this point, like you want to be confident, but you don't want to get to the point where you're so overconfident that like you cross a threshold and then you won't listen to anybody's feedback at all,
oh, absolutely.
because I feel like you get like to this point where uh you know you, you've got alpha readers and stuff, and even they're like, oh, they just realize certain topics, if they're brought up to you, that you're just not going to listen, and it's
Right.
like that's not helping you grow. So I think that's always, you surround yourself with yes people. So I think um that's a
That is
place where we need to be self-aware.
exactly because that does not serve you well as a writer. If you just believe that, well, there's no, it goes back to what you were saying at the very beginning. There's no room for improvement. I have reached that 0 point. And that I don't believe, like you said, will ever happen. It's something that you should strive for, let's say, but you're never going to actually reach it. There are always going to be things about your writing that readers are going to bring up to you that you should, as a writer, listen to. And yeah, you don't have to take everyone, writing should never be by committee, but there are things that you should, as a writer, at least take into consideration as you're writing, and then change, adjust. I guess would be the best way I can put it, so that it
Work
becomes
on.
work on, so that it becomes part of your style.
Right.
Now, for myself, I'm still at the point because I've only got 4 books out, and I'm writing all the time, and I go back and I
You
read
are
reviews.
writing all the time. Like, in the last 2 years that I have been writing a book, one book, how many books have you put out and are in the middle of writing? It's you're writing, Paul. You're writing a lot. Okay,
We're
so
not
don't be like only 4 books, dude. Like you got books coming. Like things are just
okay.
everywhere.
Okay, yes, and I've been very fortunate recently because of the pandemic of having the
Silver
luxury.
lining time.
Exactly. That means it's my voice has changed over those 4 books. a lot of voice changing has been because I'm not just writing for Cynthia any longer. I go back and I look at the original um, Submissive Lies when it was just called Jen's Story, and it was so conscious in
It
many
was so.
respects.
What was it again? I didn't catch that. It was so
Stream of
stream of
consciousness.
consciousness. Okay.
Yeah, where it is very loose, and it was so much more actually as if it were just thoughts instead, because
Sure.
uh, that was pretty much, it was first person, and it was, a lot of it was just her thought on what she was doing. Now I look at publishing Submissive, and it is by far a much better book. My voice changed through the editor that I'm working, the input I got from beta readers, and all of that helped the book become something that was, to mine, publishable. I look at it now though, and I'm like, between Submissive Lies, Ferris, voice has grown and changed, and in my opinion, gotten for the better. I will say that there are still parts of my writing style, my voice, that I want to work on. That I recognize now. And all writers are very self-critical. I mean, it's just part of who we are.
It's a constant refining process.
Yes.
And I
And
can't speak to other writers, but I know you and I are on the same page that we're both just anal retentive. Like we just, we cannot settle. Nothing is ever good enough. So
right. And worst critics. I mean, you have said things to me about your writing that I have said, "Oh, Eris, don't. No, you're wrong." And I have to be careful sometimes when I say it, because knowing what I know now, I'm like, okay, but that is how she feels as a writer, Shane. And it's not for you to tell her she's wrong, because that is part of your growth process.
exactly. And I want to be self-critical because I don't like it. I don't want to get overconfident, and I want to be able to look at stuff and go, okay, this is working. There's other things I wish I could have done X, Y, and Z better. And then, knowing that, what will I do to make the next book even better in that area than I did this time?
Right. All of which I agree with. So when you've told me things like that, you've been self-critical about yourself, I've had to stop myself. And it's somewhat because I'm putting on my reader's hat and I'm like, oh God, no, please don't change. I love your voice, your style. That's what I want. And then I have to take that reader's hat off and put on my writer's hat for a moment and say, but Shane, you cannot stop any writer from growing. And for you to tell someone, oh, no, don't say that about writing. You're wrong. It's not right either. So there's a dichotomy there. There's opposing forces at work. There's one, which is the reader saying, oh, I love the way you write. I love your style. And then there's the writer saying, oh, please don't talk badly about yourself, except that I know as a writer you need to grow. So you hear what you are saying, and you have the right to say that. And in cases, you should be. I mean, we all should be self-critical of our writing, but not to the point where it's debilitating, right?
Sure. But I think a lot of this push-pull dynamic between the author and the reader of, the reader's like, don't change, I like it, and the author's like, but I'm trying to grow. I think you see the same thing, which is the example everyone knows, which is you have a favorite musical artist or band you like, and you're like, oh, but I only like the early albums, the later ones are crap. Well, the artist probably doesn't think they're crap. They probably are like feel like they did a good job on that, but it's just you get used to one style and then they start growing, but you're like, yes, but I like this flavor of jelly. You know what I mean? Like
exactly. And yeah, it is difficult. You want to always have them do things that way because it makes you feel good and you like that, and there's a comfort zone. But as a writer, as an artist, you want to grow beyond just being locked in one narrow little, lane. I know we talk as writers of being in our lane, but I think our voice is different. Our voice isn't necessarily being in. Our voice is style in which we write with our lane. And that, as you pointed out earlier, I don't think is something that you ever want to stop growing.
And I think the nature of art is the nature of art is not a consistent commercial product, and that is where sometimes the disconnect happens. And I'm not saying one that authors should stop growing and just write the same stuff forever. And I'm not saying either that readers have to like new stuff. If you don't like it, you don't like it. That's how art and entertainment works. You like what you like, right? I mean,
yeah,
it kind of is what it is. But it's kind of just the nature of the beast. Art is and are you writing for art or are you writing for money? Which I'm going to bring up 1,000 times because so many decisions as a writer are somewhere on that axis of the art money spectrum.
Exactly. You want to write. Ultimately, all writers want to be read. I mean, who was it that said, I cannot remember. A famous author said, "I'd rather be read, or I'd rather be dead than not." And all writers want to be read. Of course, you're going to try it in your style and your way that is to connect with readers. Of course, now you start bringing in the whole aspect of it. You have to be able to make sure that your voice is not going to be something that turns readers off, but that they're going to want to continue to read what you're writing. That's one of the things in my particular voice that I still don't have the 100% confidence that I want to have. I think as a writer, of growing to do. I have a decent voice, but I'm not 100% satisfied with my voice. So it's always growing and always changing.
I don't think we're ever going to be satisfied 100%. But it's just about what our goals are. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's just like what do I want to do? And me, I want to entertain people. That is my goal. And so I write in such a way as to do that. Like my goal is not to. And I read these books, so when I say this, I'm not belittling these types of books, but my goal is not to write, like, cerebral literature that's depressing. Like, yeah. I read those books, I like them, but that is not my thing I want to do with my writing. I wish to entertain people in the same as when you are with me in person, I joke around a lot because what I get out of it is people are smiling and laughing and having a good time. And that's what I want for people. So when I write, that's what I want them to do is have a good time.
Right. So your style reflects that. That is part of your voice. That's part of your style, is you are trying to entertain people, draw them into the story. And at the end of the day, when they close the final page, they're like, wow, that was great. I love that. You're not trying to go off and sit on a somewhere and for quality in life and where do I, end into the grand scheme of things. That's not the style either of us is doing.
Yeah, I'm not trying to write The Grapes of Wrath.
Exactly.
That's not that that's not a good book. It's just that's not what I'm doing. And I have noticed that, I am in some writing groups on Facebook, for example, that are mixed types, all different types of writers. Like I'm in one group that's regional to where I live, to the state I live in. So there's every kind of writer in there. And, you'll see some discussion threads and you definitely will see those folks that are literary focused and they definitely poo-poo genre fic and especially romance. And it's, like this is lesser. And it's like, I don't see why entertaining people is not a legitimate goal, but there's some folks that are just like, oh, it's not, I don't know.
Oh, it's true. You're not the only authors that have suffered. It's actually one of the Kurt Vonnegut in his books on writing talked about extensively is first started writing. He was not obviously a serious writer. He was a science fiction writer where he got shoved. And for the time, science fiction, much like romance is considered today. In fact, I would say that they're probably very similar in terms of how they were perceived by the, public.
Yeah, sci-fi was like pulp.
Yeah, thank you. That is exactly the term. And romance was considered pulp or
And by the way,
trash.
there is nothing wrong with pulp.
No,
Like,
but
this is a topic for another show. And
yeah,
then maybe we have another episode that has to do with plotting versus pantsing or whatever. But I legit have a plot formula that is a pulp fiction from the 30s plot formula that I use frequently. Okay,
right.
so there's nothing wrong with pulp. Those plot lines sell.
But purists, academics,
They don't care whether it sells. It just needs to be, which is fine. There's a place for that stuff, but that's not what I'm doing.
right. The kind of our style, right? We're not writing at, I don't even want to call it a genre. It's just not our writing. We're writing to entertain.
Yeah.
We're writing, and in our particular case, writing a romance about things, colored reading style. It's more important to us. I've had talks with other people where like, well, why did you pick? I didn't really pick romance. It's what I'm drawn to. Okay.
You write what you want to write. Like, you can't force yourself to write some other weird thing.
Right. And I think we talked about this a little in the episodes, which was a lot of history. You would think, well, if Shane read a lot of history, why isn't he writing history books? As a writer, that's not what's out of me. That's not what attracts. That's not what it doesn't soul. Romance did. And that's why I started writing. Because that's what I wanted to write. The stories in my head were those stories. They weren't military stories or stories from the West or anything like that. So my style is reflective of that interests me. I'm curious how you see your style and whether it's evolved or I'm sure you'll say it's evolved, but how do you, being a much more you feel your own writing style has changed?
Well, I will say, first of all, that, like, as we were talking about before, it's kind of objective for someone else to just say what my style is, and you had made some comments on that, and sometimes it's just stuff I don't want to say I don't see, I just don't think about it. Like, some of the things that I'm not even doing consciously, maybe another person would recognize that's happening. I will say that I've had people review my books that have said that my prose is minimal and sparse, and they liked that. And then I've had other people say that my prose is way too purple and flowery, and if you would just cut down on the flowery language, this would be a good book. So I don't know how I'm achieving both of those things at one time. Like, like maybe it's the setting, you know what I mean? Like, maybe I do know that in different settings, like in contemporary, like in Bass Ackwards, I am more kind of minimal and blunt about the way I say things. But then when I'm writing something in fantasy, I tend to get a lot more metaphorical and stuff like that. And I know that when I get to scenes that are important, they're dramatic, I definitely do pull out all the stops, like verbally, like a lot of metaphors. I don't know. I do like to hunt down a specific phrase that, like, if something's important, I want it to hit the reader like a gut punch. Like, I don't want to just gloss over some important ass thing. It needs to be like, you see that a lot in the book where it's like something's important and now we've got a big paragraph of stuff, but when it's important, we've got like 2 words on 1 line. Like, that's it, because I want it to hit people.
Right.
So I know that's a pattern I have. I would say another thing that I'm kind of aware of doing, that when this is probably the one thing I'm specifically aware of doing, and this is deep down in the nuts and bolts, this is not a general statement, but when I am on a prose level, like, when I'm just putting a sentence together specifically, I have an end product in mind. Like,
okay.
The best way I always think of as an analogy for this is, like, you know how there's cultures that have no written language, so everything has to be passed down through stories, oral
Yeah,
tradition.
or oral tradition, right?
Right. So and typically there would be people or a person who was the storyteller, and they would learn all of the stuff and they would be able to repeat it back, and people would sit around and listen to them, and they'd be, completely rapt attention on that person. Um I want my stories, if you read them aloud, to sound like a storyteller is telling them to you. Like, I want it to
Okay.
sound good out loud, which is a weird thing because I mean, unless it's an audiobook, which I don't have any audiobooks yet, but we typically don't read that way. We just are absorbing the words with our face. Like, um,
Okay.
so when I'm constructing a sentence, like everything from the combinations of letters being used, like, is this too alliterative? Do we have enough S sounds or V sounds in this sentence to give the right mood I want? Um, to the number of syllables that are in words or the number of words in the sentence. Like, I want there to be a certain meter to things. I know this sounds like so weird and anal, but this is my process, and it's why it takes me a long time, because I'm not happy if it doesn't have this in it. It's like the timing of notes on a sheet of music. I know that sounds like esoteric
That
and like
oh,
snobby. Um, it,
that's interesting though, because that's when you were describing it. That's what I was. It's exactly what you just said. It sounds almost musical. Like,
well, I'm glad it sounds that way because that's what I'm going for. And like, if I'm trying to make a sentence and I know what I want to express. Like, I know what I need to convey to the reader. If I can't make it work somehow, like I can't find the right words or way to put words together that gives me a pleasing meter, I will change the sentence. I will figure out a different way to say, or sometimes I will even I'm like, do you really need to say this concept this bad that you're going to say it awkwardly? And I'll just be like, no, I don't. And I just won't do it. Like, I'm that stubborn about it. Um,
wow. Okay.
but like, I know it's corny. It's like, I want it to be like a song. Like, you can't just stop in the middle. You have to keep listening until you've got through it. And like,
But
I straight up, so I have an example I'm going to give you.
okay,
Is that
good, good.
okay?
No, yes, of
So
course.
it's like a short paragraph from the work in progress, which, as always, continuing to be the mortal coil and my slow progress on it. It's like a short, like 2 or 3 sentence paragraph of it. I'm gonna read it like a normal person, and then I'm gonna read it how I hear it in my head. So, like, the
Okay.
normal person reading is, he needed to gather his wits, needed to watch for her moves and counter, but the arena in which they sparred formed and evaporated like a fever dream. There were feints within feints, and no clear boundaries to say which of them played games with whom. But as long as Medusa circled him, Perseus would drag himself back to his feet. They were together. So that's a normal pace of well, for me, a normal pace of reading. I think audiobooks are a lot slower,
Yeah.
but in my head, when I'm putting sentences together and I'm going to make some percussive noises that are going to be annoying, but it's to make a point, it's like, he needed to gather his wits, needed to watch for her moves and counter. But in the arena in which they sparred, formed and evaporated like a fever dream. There were feints within feints and no clear boundaries to say which of them played games with whom. But as long as Medusa circled him, Perseus would drag himself back to his feet. They were together. And it's like, it's not a repetitive meter, but it has to be something. Like, I
No, but
can't just will. The last sentence, I could say, but as long as Medusa circled him, Perseus would get up. But that doesn't have this. It feels like, oh, what happened? It cut me off in the middle. Like, it feels like there's like a certain number of syllables I need to hear, or I just don't accept it.
yeah. No, and when you were reading it the second time with your hand beats, I get what you're saying. I could hear it then. The first time you read it, and this is where I'm going to say, it's I think it's going to be different with every reader. Is it read almost like a news report kind of pace,
Sure.
uh, 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 whereas the second time when you started actually listening to the beats, then you could hear it. And I'm sure when people are reading it on the page as opposed to what you just said, listening to it, you're going to start picking up on those beats, I would think, more.
I don't think people need to be like, I need to be conscious of it. I don't know that I care if anybody else is conscious of it. If it gets in their subconscious and
Yes.
somehow that makes them like my voice, but they can't put their finger on why, but it's that, then that's fine with me. Like, but for me, I like, it has to be that way or I go crazy.
Yeah.
I was also, again, when I was making my notes, because I wanted to think about this and not just be like, oh, I don't know, Shane, what is my voice? I think another part of voice are the things that the author chooses to focus on when they're telling a story. As you pointed out, an example of an author that, there'll be someone puts their hands in their hair. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or there's another authors that spend a lot of time talking about you're a reader of fantasy, and you know that there are a lot of travel scenes where we talk about the environment a lot.
Mhm.
Like, and some authors are notorious for including a lot of that.
Yeah.
And so I've noticed for myself, I tend to focus on facial expressions and body language of characters. If it's the POV character, like their internal physical reactions to stuff, like their jaws tightening or their hands go into fists or their shoulders drop or whatever. I tend to focus on that kind of stuff. I was thinking setting wise, I instead of spending a lot of time describing a room that someone is in or a setting that they're in, I tend to grab like one or two seemingly unimportant details, but just with that is enough to like encapsulate what's happening, like what's the flavor of the space we're in.
Right.
So I don't, for me, because I don't like extensive descriptions of scenery and stuff like that to go on and on. Like I like enough to give me a sense, but I get bored. So I don't want people to get bored when they're reading my stuff.
Right. And but for readers, again, I think some readers really do love that sort of thing.
I think so.
And they will then tend to gravitate towards authors who provide for them. And I think this again goes back to what we said at the very beginning. You're right. It's not for us sometimes to decide as writers what our voice is. I mean, we will work at it and we have an idea. Readers are the ones who definitely tell us what our voice is. Now, your readers are always going to interpret it through their own lens.
Exactly. And that's how art works.
Right, exactly. And they're going to see it differently than you perceive it. And they may even recognize things about your writing that you don't recognize. And they're going to bring that up.
Absolutely.
Good or bad. That's one of the things I've learned in the past 2 years is writers have brought up, critics, reviewers have brought up things about my writing. And as hard as it's hurt, other authors have brought up things about my writing. And as hard as it's hurt sometimes to hear it, it's important because even though I'm not going to change my overarching writing style, there are things that people have brought to my attention that I've had to stop and say, okay, either I care about how my readers enjoy my stories or I don't, then I'm just going to write whatever the hell I want. And if you don't buy it, fine, don't buy it. I don't care. But if I want to be commercially successful, if I want to have this craft be something that puts bread on the table, then I have to change parts of my writing style. I have to listen to other readers, other authors, so that it does become commercially viable.
It's good. It's good to take all that information in. Like you don't have to, you're not required to make every kind of modification that everyone is suggesting to you. But it's good to listen when people are pointing stuff out, like you said, that maybe you're not noticing. I mean, I know it seems like a pattern I'm finding is that I try to avoid doing things that annoy me. But as you pointed out, they're, one man's trash is another man's treasure. So there's people that probably like the things that annoy me. Like one very specific example is me, Eris, as a real life person, and you've been to my house so you know this, I don't cook. I'm horrible at it. I say that's very absolute once in a while, but my cooking extends to like, let's take this processed, pre-made, boxed item and heat it up, okay?
Yeah.
And that's just, as a human being, I don't like cook and food prep. I don't like being in the kitchen. I just don't like it.
Right.
And so when I'm reading books and the author is going on and on about a food prep situation, I'll skim. I get bored. I'm like, this is not, because a lot of people really like cooking. It's therapeutic, it's creative, and that's awesome. Like, I'm glad people like cooking because then I have things to eat. But for me, I don't care about the process. And so sometimes I will see that going on, and sometimes to me it comes off as the concept of author service. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
And as for anyone listening that does not know, author service is when the author is including a lot of something in the book clearly for themselves because they enjoy it. And I'm not saying we shouldn't enjoy what we write, but sometimes it is gratuitously obvious that the author is going on and on forever about something that probably is not germane to the plot. They just like it.
That's the key right there. You really notice it when an author does it, and I've done it myself, when it's not germane to the plot.
And it's not like it's illegal, like you're going to get kicked out of the world of authors. It's just, no. I notice that sometimes, and sometimes I'm like, okay, when it gets a lot, I will skim. So I try not to be like that too hard. And I know a lot of my personal interests, no one gives a shit about. So like, I don't put them in my books.
Yeah, but even when it slips in sometimes, and I with you, I couldn't honestly say I could find an example of that. But when I've seen it in other writers and it slips in, it does stand out. And if you're interested in the subject material, you're right. Readers will just go, oh, I love that. I love hearing about the recipes. And in some cases it is like almost like getting a little mini cookbook within your much larger romance novel.
But sometimes you're like, okay, we're on page 3 of beekeeping, and this book has nothing to do with beekeeping. Like, one of the characters happens to be, like, it's not even a main character. It's like, oh, okay, we don't need all this. It's right. Cool you know this, but...
And my example in a situation like that comes out of Ferris. And it's funny because I was just discussing this today with another author, is I wrote a scene in Ferris that's not in the book, but I wrote it and it was a scene with a minor character, and it was author service in a sense, because it was a gentleman who had served in Vietnam. And I wrote this scene about him seeing his experience in Vietnam and how it related to the experience of Ferris and his quote unquote nemesis.
Okay. I have not read it yet. I need to.
Yeah, his nemesis in the book is a colonel, and his boss gets them together, and I wrote this whole entire scene about how his boss is trying to make this analogy about what happened to him in Vietnam and how it relates to Ferris and the colonel. And I loved it. Thought it was a great scene, and it was author service because it was a subject that I knew about, and blah 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 blah. Finished it, sent it off to the beta readers, and one of them, and I'm gonna mention her, Stella, came back to me and said, "Why is this here?" She says, "It's a wonderful story, make no mistake, but it is a minor character who's telling it, and it doesn't further the plot. It's just this thing stuck in." She says, "It's full of rich detail and it's wonderfully written. But you could have had this entire sequence. They came into the office and he lectured them and said, you guys need to get your shit together. And you'd been 10 pages further into the story." And I was like, oh, yeah. I loved the story, and it was in my voice, but it was total author service. It was me having this idea in my head that didn't really further and it didn't the story along.
I think author service isn't always bad, but again, as we're saying, if it's not totally relevant to the plot, then I think we have to do the hard thing and like cut some stuff. You know? Exactly.
That's exactly my point. It was an example of it. It really didn't further the plot. It did not. Even when I ultimately took it out, I took it out completely. And I did just basically in fact, I think I ultimately ended up it being just Ferris ruminating on, I had to go to this meeting. And when I came out of it, I realized that not only was I chastised, but not only was the colonel chastised, but I was being chastised too. And in terms of the overall plot of the novel, that simple little detail said all that needed to be said, not a 5-page story about, this minor character in Vietnam.
Sure,
And
but it sucks when you wrote all that and it's like, it's good writing in and of itself.
yes,
It's good
yes,
writing in a vacuum, but you're like, does this really belong here?
it doesn't. Yeah, and in terms of my writing style, it's part of that growth process. It's like, okay, so I find it's another thing that happened with an earlier book too, where I wrote an entire chapter and we ended up taking it out because you can write these little stories within the context of a much bigger story. If they're not pertinent to advancing the plot, it can be off-putting to readers. Like we talked about some authors we know, and their writing style is to include the level of detail about things that don't advance the plot. And so you said this term, and it's important because it's one of those things that every writer hates hearing about from a reader.
Mm-hmm.
I skimmed.
Oh yeah, that hurts. That hurts.
It does.
Because you're like, oh, it was boring. And I mean, some stuff that in the whole, you can't please all the people vein, that's going to happen to some degree, some percentage all the time. But you don't want to hear that a lot. Like, you don't want to hear, because you're just like, oh, this is boring. If you hear that a lot, you're like,
Yeah.
But to what you were saying about how you had a couple of instances where you're like, I wrote this cool scene or a few paragraphs and I ended up taking it out because it wasn't advancing the plot. That speaks also, I think, to each of us having different processes for getting the stuff out of our head.
Yes.
So it's like the stuff you're doing there on the page, I'm doing in the not writing down very much, but daydreaming and outlining stage.
Yeah, and that's going to be for another episode.
Right.
The difference.
But I'm just saying, like, it's not that, it's just the same thing is happening at a different point because we have different processes.
And we have different writing styles. And yes, we have a different process. Writing style and process are kind of hard to separate because my writing style is definitely as a planter. I plot a little bit. I have a generalized outline of where I need the story to go. And then I let the voices run, which for me means I let the scenes happen organically and things like this happen. I talked with you about this a while back when we were together. I said, I'm starting to discover as part of my writing style is sometimes I need to do that. And I talked with Stella about it after she had pointed out. I said, I needed to get that scene out. She says, of course you did. I said, but I got it out in the context of plopping it in the middle of this book where it doesn't need to be. And she says, that's right. It's good to get it out. Now take it out. And
it's totally fine. Like that's what your process is. That's just fine.
That's my writing style. That's my process. And recognizing that though, going back in hindsight and going, wow, I've done that a couple of times, and recognizing it was a little bit of an eye-opening experience. That, wow, okay, so part of my process, part of my style of writing is, because I am a planter, that sometimes that kind of thing is going to happen. I just need to recognize it.
And be accepting that it could happen and be like, okay, I'm doing the thing. Like, it's happening.
I recognize, being able to recognize, okay, I did it. And now I need to, in the editing process, I need to fix it. It needed to come out. And the book is, honestly, after it was published, I went back to Stella and I said, thank you, because this book is much better for that scene not being there. It moves at a better pace. And people, of course, who've read the book don't know that.
Yeah, they didn't see the early versions or any of that stuff that got taken out.
Right. And so, in a sense, I'm sure there may be readers out there that would go, oh my God, I wish that scene had been there. I love that kind of level of detail. And I feel like I was cheated. If I hadn't said anything in this podcast, they would have never known.
They would never know that was in there.
But I think it's important for readers and other authors to realize that if that is in fact part of your process and part of your writing style, there's nothing wrong with it.
Exactly. And to your point of like how you can't really separate the process from the voice. As you were explaining that, I was also trying to filter my own stuff through it and like see how that applies. And I was like, I think plotting works for me because I like to, when I'm actually writing, put my focus on the way the language is constructed.
Mm-hmm.
I would be very upset if I also had to figure out what the hell was happening with the plot at the same time. So I think it works for me to get all that out of the way ahead of time as
Yeah.
best I can, because sometimes you have to pivot when you think of different things. You realize there's a plot hole or something, but I like to know where I'm going so that I can focus on how it's being constructed. And some people call that the second draft, but whatever, this is how I write.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And that's another another part of writing style is second drafts, third drafts. I've used this term, the shitty first draft. That was uh, the I can't remember who it was that used that term with me, but it was like, yeah, your shitty first draft, and that's what I think of my what I call alpha drafts, or my first draft is it's a shitty first draft, because then I need to sit down and go back and find those points in my writing where I've done that author service, and peel them out.
yeah.
And and yeah, you sometimes you do that through the help of beta readers, and sometimes you find it on your own. And sometimes you have a co-author that points it out to you late at night and practically puts you in tears. Um, but it,
Aw.
yeah, it's important. It really is. It's important. Um,
It was B,
and
wasn't it? I made you cry, didn't I? I'm just kidding.
no, it was Jennifer and Jasmine when she made me take out an entire chapter
Aw.
in the editing process. No, here again though,
But
it was
that's the
necessary.
process. Sometimes you have to write some
That's
stuff down and then it may not get used.
right. So the going back a little bit, in our earlier conversation, we were talking about we started to talk a little bit about, as writers, we borrow from other writers, and that's part of the whole evolution of becoming a writer, I think. But there is something that we kind of touched on, but we didn't go into a lot of detail, which is the idea of going a little bit too far. When you borrow from another writer, at what point does it become, well, I like this style of writing and it appeals to me, and I kind of want to write like that, to just all out, oh, I'm just going to steal that style. And there's a gray line there between mimicking someone and outright plagiarizing.
So that was my question. I'm like, if you're not copying someone's words or their exact plot structure or whatever, if you're mimicking a style, can that be plagiarism? I'm
Well,
not like that. I would like to preface this that sounds like I'm running around trying to mimic someone's style and now finding excuses for it. But I was legit thinking about this. I don't know if you can play legally on paper. You can plagiarize. It's actually plagiarism if you're writing in a style of if I wrote a book tomorrow. If I wrote a sonnet in the style of Shakespeare, but I wrote this the words, am I plagiarizing Shakespeare?
no, and I think that's kind of what I think. There's a discussion to be had between the difference between borrowing from someone's style and writing in their same style. Much like I was talking about, I would love to be able to write like Hunter S. Thompson. As a
Mm-hmm.
reader, I love his style. I can't do it. But if you were to literally retake what he wrote, take Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, and rewrite it, but in your quote unquote style,
Mm-hmm.
that's where there's that gray area, because
So wait,
then
you're talking about rewriting something someone else wrote in your style?
yeah, and
That's probably plagiarism.
that's what I'm saying. That's the
Okay, I
gray
didn't
area.
realize that's what you were getting at out of that question. I thought it was just mimicking the way of the types of word choices a person uses or the types of things in the environment they choose to observe. Because my thought on that was I don't know if it's plagiarism, but I feel like if you keep doing it and you know you're doing it and you're not bothering to develop your own voice or style, then that's just kind of lazy. You know what I mean? Unless you're being
Okay,
paid to ghostwrite and your job is to mimic a style.
Right.
It just seems lazy more than anything else. But if you're talking about, oh, I'm going to take the plot of Jaded and I'm going to write the exact same thing, but it's going to sound like Eris wrote it, then yeah, that's probably. I mean, I am in no means any kind of like person that knows anything about the law and the legalities of what counts or does not count as plagiarism. But like that does sound pretty sketchy for a person to be doing that.
Except it is. Except that we've experienced that in some degree with Copy Pasta Chris, because she had,
and that was very specific.
Yes, she had Fiverr people she was lifting other people's work, giving it to a Fiverr author or writer, saying, change this a little bit.
Massage this into something that's different enough.
Different enough. So
and being real smart and using famous people to copy from, like,
oh
yeah, if you're going to be a criminal, don't be an idiot. Like,
right? Don't use somebody like.
Not that
me.
I'm condoning plagiarism. If you're crafty about it, that's not what I'm trying to say.
Right.
I'm just joking. Like, okay, you're on top of being a thief. You're dumb.
Right. Exactly. Well, that's exactly what happened. That's what got her hung up. Right? Is that people were out there who were like, wait a minute,
because that person's widely read enough that other people were like, hey, hang on.
Yeah, this is exactly the same scene, the same actions. Everything was the same, except that there was just a few minor tweaks to it so that it got into that gray area. Okay, so could she legit claim that, no, I had that same idea? Because, we've run across this. Well, no, I had the same idea. I know my book is about vampires. It's just that, this guy's name is not Vlad, it's Flawed.
Right.
And it is a gray area. So it's something that I think that in terms of writing styles, authors can't just, every author should have developed their own writing style.
Yeah, I think you start out like, I mean, it's like anything else in life. When you're younger and you're like, I'm going to learn how to cook things, you watch what your parents are doing and you do what they did. And then you grow up and move out and learn your own things to cook. You know what I mean? It's like you got to learn from somebody, but then eventually you're going to find your own way to do it.
Right. And you're going to do it your own way. You're not going to fall into the trap that and I'm not saying any of the authors that we know do that. I mean, but we've been in groups where we've heard about these stories about people doing it. And it's a trap, like, well, I'm just going to take this story and rewrite it in my own style, except that you're not really writing a story. You're basically just copying somebody else's work and changing a few words and then claiming that as your style. That's not.
I say glancing at the eighth house, like, yeah, I wrote that story.
That's not the same thing.
Isn't it though?
I don't see it that way.
Okay, I'm just being a smart ass.
Yeah.
I don't think I mean, a lot of people have retold the Hades Persephone myth. I'm not,
Yeah.
I'm no outlier here.
Right. And retelling is different in my mind. Somebody could retell Jaded. And, it could be a completely different story, but still just be a retelling of Jaded or any story of mine.
Well, was not 650 Shades a fanfic of Twilight?
Right. Now, that was you're coming up with another thing, which is the whole idea of fanfic and why some authors don't like fanfic, because they feel it is derivative of their writing style, their creation. And I literally, when Jennifer asked me, when I wrote my fanfic, asked me if she could read it, I told the story. I balked and said, no, you don't want to.
A panic attack.
Right. I was like, oh my God, what if she reads this and says, how dare you? Those are my characters.
Because if she asked to read it and wasn't like, give me that, you know what I mean? Like,
right.
She was probably,
And because I hadn't done anything with it, I had only showed it.
It wasn't like you were publishing it everywhere and being like, look what I came up with all on my own, even though I have the same character names and setting as this person.
Right. And I think, given the groups that I was involved in, even if I had changed the names slightly, people would have keyed in on it. Thalia or Talia as Terry, somebody would have said,
Right.
wow, boy, this sounds a lot like,
Yeah. I'm paranoid in the other direction. I'm like, I have story ideas like floating around in my to be written pile, and a book will come out, and it will be somewhat similar, and I'll be like, fuck. I'm like, can I write this now? Like, if I write it, are people gonna be like, oh, you're copying so and so's idea? And like, sometimes it is really frustrating. And there's straight up stuff I have scrapped because I'm not kidding. It was so close to something that came out like, I've got so many things in my like files of notes on stories that are, I have the whole story in my head, just haven't started writing it yet.
yeah,
But there's been a couple things that have come out that I'm like, I can't even write this because everybody's going to be like, you just copied this other person's thing. And I can't be over here like, no, dude, I got a Word document that's dated 2015.
yeah,
I
yeah.
promise it's really my. They're not gonna believe me. So I'm just like, fuck. I don't think I could. I don't think I could do this.
Okay,
So
and again, that's again part of what I'm talking about here is that as writers, we can feel that way. As you just said, you feel that way sometimes, like, wow, I don't know that I can continue with this or go on with this because it sounds too much like X that just came out.
and I've been
And
on both ends of the thing. I've had stuff where I was writing something, and then in the middle of it, for entertainment or whatever reasons, curiosity, went to read another writer's thing in the same genre and went like, oh shit, this is really close to what I wrote, and have sent the thing to the author and been like, hey, like people that I'm friends with, not just brand
yeah,
new author I don't know. I'm like, hey, is this cool that I'm writing this because it has X, Y, and Z similarities, and I don't want to be stepping on your toes. And I've
right,
had people, at least one person come to me on that front as well, and it was fine. But I could see, when they sent it to me, like, oh yeah, I do see the similarities at the beginning, and then the subject branched off and it became very different. But in the beginning, I was like, oh, this is quite a lot like my thing, but then it was very different.
right. And so you run that risk, and you also run the risk as a writer denying readers something that they might love. So it's such a fine line, gray area situation to know when your writing style is your writing style. Subject matters of what we write can be very much similar to something somebody's already written.
Yeah, and there's tropes are out there. They
Yes,
exist for a reason because we like them, but there are, they get repeated, and that's the nature of that's why they're tropes. If they didn't get repeated, we wouldn't have a trope, would we?
right, exactly. So it's just finding your own writing style is part of the whole process of being a writer.
I think in your heart if, and that sounds very like emotional, but I think if you're acting in good faith or not. Now, like,
Yes,
whether that can be proved on paper
yes,
or not, but I'm saying as an individual writer, you know what you're up to. You know
yeah,
if you wrote that thing and then discovered later someone had something like it, and you're like, well, hell, versus like, oh, this is a really good idea. I'm just gonna write the same thing and change it. Like, you know what you're doing. Don't front.
yes, exactly. And I think if anything, the reason I even brought the subject up is more of that kind of cautionary tale to say, don't do that to up and coming writers, because in the end, people get caught.
And you're not
Everyone,
going to grow. That's not help.
yeah,
Mimicking someone else is not going to help you evolve.
right. I mean, as much as like I say, oh, I wish I could write like Hunter S. Thompson. I'm not Hunter S. Thompson, and I'm not ever going to write exactly like him, and I'm not trying to write like him now. Um, but I would also never say, well, fuck, if I can't write like Hunter S. Thompson, I'm going to do the next best thing. I'm just going to steal his work, rewrite it, quote unquote, in my own voice.
Yeah.
And
And
that's
that's a very dishonest way of like
right.
achieving some goal. And it's a paper goal anyway, because like it's a paper achievement when you get there.
Yeah.
Like if you
And
sell a billion copies, or that's too many, but if you sell a lot of copies, but it's like that your thing is a mimic of somebody else's entire story, like you didn't earn that.
yeah, you
But
didn't earn.
I'm not saying. Listen, you hear horror stories in the community, and you know that there are in any crowd of people, there's always these people that are like so delusional that they believe what they're doing is that they have convinced themselves that somehow it's okay or it's
Yeah.
right or they didn't do the thing that was wrong.
Right. They didn't do anything wrong because I
And
changed it. I mean, I changed the words a little bit. So,
yeah, it's always something. So
it's
there's always going to be those people, but
yeah, it's just
I think most people want to do the right thing.
yeah, they do. I honestly they do. Uh, At least the authors that I've run into and I've talked with and the people that I'm comfortable with, they all want to do the right thing. Um, I do know that there are some people that want to achieve success, sometimes having done the hard work, and that's a trap. That's a very slippery slope. And if the author out to think, well, easiest way for me to achieve success is to not work at my own stuff, simply borrow the successful style of say Kane
Mm-hmm.
or yourself or my whomever. That's you don't want it. You want to avoid that, not the road to success. That's a trap.
I mean, and it's
And
clear that for those folks, they're at the money end of the spectrum. And they're so
yeah,
far, they've fallen off the end to I'm going to do, because you can be at the money end of the spectrum and still not be a plagiarist. Like, you can
yeah,
just, all your entire focus is marketing all day long. And, like, you write, you have a specific niche and you write that over and over again and people want it. And, like, that is fine. There is nothing wrong with that. And be doing it, and they're all your own stories and they're all stuff you made up and it's fine, but like people can fall off the end of it and go, anything is justified if I make money off it, and that's
yeah.
where it gets pretty
And
hairy.
yeah, that's where you've I think at that point you've crossed that line and you're not in an area anymore. Then it's pretty black and white, and that's not going to serve you well in the end. You're going to be ostracized eventually.
Yeah.
I mean, you will get just
Karma's coming for you. You know what I
right.
mean? Like,
That's right. So I'm curious. You have your own. We talked about this. Unique writing voice. Talk to me for a moment about how that voice relates to themes, your writing structure. Is it important, or are the two of those connected for you as a writer? Do you think my voice dictates some of the themes, or is it the other way around? I choose themes and then write them in my own distinctive voice, because
I
it does go back a little bit to what you were just talking about with the eighth house. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
So now that I'm hearing you say this question out loud and explain it a little more, because for those of you listening at home, we do have some talking points ready. And when you had written this down, I'm like, my notes say, I honestly don't know if I'm smart enough to answer this question. LOL.
You are, trust me,
But
you
like the
are.
way you're phrasing it now, it I don't want to say it didn't make sense before, but it like now I could answer it because I think I thought you were asking something else. Because before my answer was like, I'm sure I could do all those things. Like, I'm sure I could do all those things and try to imitate someone else, but it seems like it's more work to spend that much time analyzing what another writer is doing and making sure I match that than just doing whatever the hell I want to do. Like, it just seems like a
Right.
lot of work to like try to imitate someone. But I realize that's not what you're asking. I would say that I probably the theme comes first and then the voice, and I realize that there are going to be things in common to a contemporary story like Bass Ackwards versus a historical story like Gallows Pole or something.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's going to be things in common, but I would like to think, and I could be wrong, I would like to think that the voice, the tone of it is somewhat different when we're talking about a trailer rental place in East Texas versus 18th century England. Like I would hope that I'm changing my tone to suit those environments. I do try to do that. I don't know how successful I am at it, but I do try to do that. Like I've noticed in reviews of the Eighth House, a lot of people will say, I had to get used to the writing style. It was very different. I wasn't, but a chapter in, I was good. But like there have been repeat comments like that it took them a minute. So I feel like there's got to be some difference that I'm doing on purpose that people are picking up on.
You're doing the purpose as a writer in terms of the theme or locale, a historical setting, time, place, you're doing that consciously, right? I mean, you're
Yeah.
making that
I'm making
choice.
those choices. Like when I'm writing in ancient Greeks and it's mythology and it's gods and demigods and monsters and stuff like that, I'm making choices about what language to do. In fact, I was reading today on Facebook one of the ever popular threads about words that get used for people's anatomy. And it was, they
Yes.
were joking about like what words do you use for penis and all this stuff. And there's like these words are common and everybody's okay with it. And these words are like, okay. And these words are cheesy, don't use them. And one of the ones that was on the list of cheesy was the word prick. And I'm like, I use prick all the time. Like, but I was realizing I don't use it hardly ever in contemporary, but I do use it in fantasy and historical a lot. And I think because when I'm writing in those settings, I'm kind of using as a guide things I've read that were written then, because I do read a lot of old books.
Yeah.
And you wouldn't, a word we use now that I use in contemporary is like dick. I will use dick in contemporary enough. That's one of my, like, in the rotation of words when I'm writing a sex scene, and I don't want to say cock 400 times in one scene. But for some reason, like, suck my dick doesn't sound right in, on a
Coming
pirate
out of,
ship in 1716. It just doesn't
yeah.
sound right. It's like, okay, who wrote this? Like, did you not do any kind of, like, put any thought into the fact of the language that would be used at the time? I mean, it doesn't have to be 100% historically accurate, because I'm sure that's different enough from how we talk today that people just couldn't get into it. But so
But
I noticed that I use the word prick a lot in
yeah, and
other
that's
settings.
right. That's a conscious choice you're making, make based upon your particular writing style for that particular book. I
Right,
mean,
like a
you wouldn't,
character wouldn't say "shut up" to someone else in ancient Greece. Like that's modern. Just certain
right.
turns of phrase, the way you talk to other people, you just wouldn't say that stuff. Like forget inventions that didn't exist, just ways that you would phrase things. I'm like, no, that's not going to fly in this setting.
Right. So I'm curious though that for other writers, their style may not, they may not think about that sort of thing. So they may be writing, and this is a bit of a stretch, so bear with me here. But Hamilton, the musical,
Sure, sure.
is set in the 1700s, early 1800s,
Right,
but it's all done in a kind of very modern rap uh, style.
right.
There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, it works really, really,
But yeah,
really
an
well.
artistic choice was made to
Exactly.
convey this information in a modern context.
Right. I'm trying to think of the A Knight's Tale.
Sure,
Another,
exactly.
yeah. So there are times when when we choose to write things in our own style that may not be the same as how someone else would write it. Like,
Exactly. But and that's a choice that is being
yes,
made to consistently do throughout whatever body of work that it is.
right.
Versus, you're going along and you're reading your historical bodice ripper, and then all of a sudden somebody says something that is just super modern. Like it's just a turn of phrase that nobody would, or it's very American and it's taking place in England or something.
Okay.
And
So
all of a sudden, it just out of nowhere, it just jars you, and there isn't another one like it, or maybe there's one more in the book, and you're just like, oh, why did this happen all of a sudden? Like, then I feel
okay,
like, okay, we weren't paying attention, but I don't want to, be criticizing
that's
people.
then that goes into another one of my is consistency of writing style. So even within even if it's not across every book you've written, do you feel it's important that your writing style within a single book is consistent?
Yes, yes.
Right?
That's an easy answer for me. Yes, I feel like I just
Okay.
I go into it knowing what the tone is. Like I've already decided how I want this thing to feel. And so going back to that whole thing about how I'm choosing words and choosing ways to phrase things in addition to like having it have a certain rhythm,
Mm-hmm.
everything needs to fit that tone. So the
Throughout.
Olympus books I want them to be dramatic and epic in tone. So I use a lot of I in my work in progress, sometimes when I will send over a chapter to people that are alpha reading, I'll highlight stuff if even I'm unsure, and I'll ask them, "Is this okay?" And in one, I had one line that used the word thrice, and it used it more than once, and I was like, "Is this word too pretentious here?" Like, I want it to feel epic, but I also don't know if it's just too silly, and I should just say 3 times.
Yeah.
But people came to like at least one comment came back that they're like, no, this fits the tone of the story, just leave it. But even sometimes myself, I'm like, is this too ridiculous? But I am trying to like use words that fit that tone.
Yes. So, and this is a good point. So within your writing style, you're working towards keeping it consistent so that it isn't going to throw readers off and sound incongruous at that one
Yeah,
point in the book. It's
exactly. I do my best. I mean, I may not always win. There may be
right.
stuff where we're always going to not achieve every last little goal of everything, but I try my best because I don't want to do anything that jars anyone out of the page. Like, when you start reading and you're conscious of the words going into your eyeballs and into your head, and then within like a paragraph or two, you're just experiencing the story. Like your brain is
Exactly.
just doing magic. And I
Exactly.
don't want anybody to like get shaken out of the magic. Like I don't want them to be distracted or interrupted in the hallucination they're in any way.
Right. No, and I mean it's what we talked about earlier when you don't want them to start skimming
Right.
because all of a sudden the the style and the tone have changed. And if, sure, it's bad when they're skimming when it's the subject matter, let's say, when we have done some author service. But you also don't want them skimming when the style and tone changes erratically. And they're like, well, no, I went into reading the eighth house because I like the style and the tone and the voice that I'm hearing in this context and setting. And then all of a sudden, if it becomes very modern, you're going to go, no, no, no,
I
that
don't
doesn't.
even know that they're going to skim. They're going to stop. They're going to be
Yeah,
like, "Oh, what's going on?" Like they may pick it back up, but if it's just a single aberration, but they were like, "Oh, what is this? Like did
yeah.
another writer
Why?
start writing this? What's happening?"
Well, yeah, and although we haven't really talked about it a lot in the context of this discussion, but with co-writes, it's one of the things that authors worry about is this story going to sound consistent throughout unless you are deliberately separating the styles in the context of the story so that it does sound different. I'm going to only write these characters and only in this voice and this style because I want that to be very unique from the other author who's going to write this character in this tone and style and voice.
And that could work. I have not personally
Yes.
co-written because I'm sure I'm too much of a pain in the ass to like no one
Oh,
would want to work with me.
God.
But they
Whatever.
think they want to, but they would find out shortly that like no.
Whatever.
Everyone I know is a pantser. They would not put up with my shit. Um, but I think that would work if each person chose I'm gonna write this character, and the other one's gonna write that character because then it feels okay to change tone or voice a little bit because you're in that POV character's head, so you're going to expect it to sound different.
Right.
That's a
And
challenge for me as a single person writing something is to make the insides of different characters' heads sound
thank you.
like I hope that character sounds. I don't know that I do the greatest job all the time, but I try. I'm trying. I'll keep trying.
Yeah. I think that's important though. Again, but it also goes back to consistency of voice and style throughout. You want characters to be different. You don't want like that Star Trek episode where they went to the planet and everyone was a carbon copy of the next.
Yeah.
You don't want that because that's going to be boring. I mean, maybe in the context of a story, you could make it work, but it's in general, you want each character to have their own unique voice within the story. And you, as the writer, are the one who determines that unique voice. Then you have to make it consistent. If you don't make it consistent, if they start to blur, then the readers are going to get pulled out of the narrative. They're going
Yeah.
to go, wait, why does she all of a sudden sound like the hero? Why is that's not her. She wouldn't talk that way, or she wouldn't say that, or wouldn't do that.
Right. It's like you have to commit to your character's personality and their,
That
their
you
traits, and then you have to decide, okay, would this person say this or would they not? Would they think this? Would this be in their internal monologue based on the type of person they are? Because
right,
sometimes as an author, you feel the thing in your head that wants to say a smart ass thing, but then you're like, yeah, but they probably wouldn't say that, or they probably wouldn't even think that because that's not who they are.
right, and that's again when you as you're finding your voice, not only as a writer but within a story, you have to keep that consistency. So this kind of segues into the one of the next things is because if you don't keep some degree of consistency, then your readers are going to become disappointed in some cases. They're going to say, well, boy, I sure loved this story because the writer kept a consistent voice and I liked that voice. And if you go ahead and change it and decide suddenly you're going to be E.E. Cummings and write an entire book in just all lowercase stream of consciousness, a reader is likely to pick it up maybe because they love your writing to begin with and look through this and go, what the
This
hell
is not what I signed up for.
this? Yeah, exactly. This isn't what I signed up for. And you as a writer have you have the right to say, well, no, but this is how I want to present this story. And this is, but I think
But you have to accept, like, you're going to put out into the world whatever you put out, whatever you choose to put out as a writer, but you also have to accept that readers are going to react to that however they react to that. Like, that's not something that's in your control and doesn't, you don't have any right for it to be in your control. Like, you put it out there and people like it or they don't.
Yep. And, if you care about your readers, like we talk about trying to be commercially viable as writers, if that's the driving criteria, you have to be thinking about that as you're writing and as you're establishing your writing style. When readers give you positive feedback about something that you wrote that they say, I loved that, you need to be thinking about that. Well, then that's something that resonated with most readers, maybe not all readers, but most readers. So I want to focus on that. I want to recreate that in my next book, and the next book beyond that, and the next book beyond that. If you are all over the map and you try to change your style from book to book to book dramatically, I'm not talking about, in the context that we were a little while ago about, well,
like setting and tone.
Setting, right. If you dramatically try to do that, you're going to probably push your readers away.
Probably. Because, I mean, voice is one of the main reasons that I personally will stick with an author. Like, if I read the first book of theirs and it's interesting, it's got plot and characters that I like, yeah, that's cool. And I was entertained, and that's awesome. I don't feel like I wasted my time reading this book. But I usually only go back for a second book and more books if I also like their voice. Like, yes. I've read some books where, like, this was an entertaining read, I enjoyed it, but, like, nothing was so addictive about hearing the way that this person tells me about the universe that, like, I have to have more of it. But the people who I'm like, yes, give me another one of those, they're like, crack, then that's a voice I like to hear.
Exactly. That's a voice that you as a reader like to hear, and you're going to go back to that. And when you go back to the second book, if the voice is the same, it's consistent, then you're probably going to go to the third book.
And there's go ahead, sorry.
Yeah. You're going to keep coming back for more, which is what we want, right? We want our readers to come back for more. If you just don't care about that, then do whatever the hell you want. But don't expect that readers are going to consistently come back.
There are some authors whose voices I like so much that I will read stuff that they've written that is, like, not my kink, not a thing I care about reading about. Like, that shows you the power of being addicted to someone's voice. You're like, I will read anything you write, even if I don't think I'm going to like this, or this is a subject on which I have no interest. Yes. But then when they're writing it, suddenly it's interesting. Suddenly it's, I'm here for this journey. So
right. Because their voice is strong enough, has hooked you, and you're willing to go into this new setting, this new genre, this new trope, whatever, with them.
Yeah, I'm like, take me by the hand, take me on the journey. I don't care where we're going.
Exactly, because I like the way you're I like the story you're telling me about this new thing that I typically have zero interest in.
But it's interesting to me because I feel like that's how I don't want to say choose authors, because usually I choose things upon either recommendation or I've heard a lot about a book and I'll give it a shot, give the writer a shot. But that's one of the ways I stay with an author, is because I like their voice. I assume other people are like this also. But it also seems like I see a lot of folks out there who really are, not that they don't like people's voices, but they're really stuck on like tropes. Like, they really only want to read shifter books, or they only want to read MC romance. And I'm just like they don't care who it's by as long as it's got werewolves in it. You know what I'm saying?
Yes. I again, now this is a different subject that we could go on about in terms of readers, our audience.
Sure.
Yes, there are people like that. And I'm not dismissing that at all. I think
no, there's nothing wrong. Like, this is how art works. Your tastes are your tastes. Like, I'm not saying the way I absorb information is correct. It's just what I'm doing.
Yeah.
It's like saying being, right-handed or left-handed, one of those is correct. It's silly. That's just what you're doing.
Right, exactly. And so I think those kinds of readers, for them, the voice isn't as important as the subject matter. And there are people, I mean, that is actually, honestly, a big thing in the history genre, is there isn't a lot of consistency in voice. And when you read history books, they're really, a lot of them are all over the map in terms of that sort of thing. But the subject matter is what drives people.
Right. You're showing up for facts on a topic.
That's right. That's right. And I think with readers in the romance genre that are like that, that's what they're there for. They're there for the topic. Mm-hmm. I'm excited about this guy and this girl that can shift into wolf form. Or
I'm always like I'll be in various groups and somebody will post a thread and they'll be like, "Hey guys, I need help. I need to see a book where, the guy and the girl are together and then they break up and he comes back 15 years later and she's now," and it's like just an extremely narrow, granular listing of things that have to be in the book. And I'm just like, you already know the whole story.
Right.
I'm trying to have this exact specific thing. So I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. It is foreign to my brain. So I'm always like, I'm fascinated with it the same way I'm fascinated with, for example, my husband and I, our brains work in completely different ways. So sometimes I'll watch him doing a task and the way he chooses to do the same thing I would do is completely upside down and backwards from any way I would ever even think about doing that task. And he's not doing it wrong. I'm like, I never in a million years would have thought to do it that way.
Right.
Because my brain just doesn't work that way. We're just different. So I'm fascinated with that kind of query, and then they've got a kid, and then there's a secret baby, and then they're also in, whatever. I'm just making up tropes, but it's like, that's oddly specific.
Right. And there are readers out there, though, that want that. That's what they want. They want that specific kind of story. It appeals to them, and they just want to read more and more and more of that. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that.
No, nothing wrong at all.
Nothing whatsoever. But in the context of who we are, you and I as writers, voice is very important to us. So that's why we're having this episode. I mean,
right.
If neither one of us had any, skin in the game for this kind of subject, we probably wouldn't have done this. We would have just said, who cares about that?
And there's nothing wrong with this either. I don't want people to hear this stuff and think I'm disparaging anything. But instead of writing entertainment fiction, we'd be writing short articles for click farm websites. You know what I mean? It's stuff that is there to be full of keywords, and that is the purpose of it.
Right, exactly. And we could make a ton of money doing that.
Yeah.
But that's not who we are as writers.
And that is a valid job.
Yeah, it is. It absolutely is. Copywriting is a valid job.
Mm-hmm.
Copywriting makes people a lot of money.
Yeah. Did I need to have, quote, a voice to write marketing copy for dildos? Not really. I needed to know how to talk about dildos. That's about it. Yeah,
and describe them in such a way that someone reading the copy is going to say, yeah, that's the dildo I want.
Hey.
Yeah. But it for us, the voices in our head, the style in which we write those voices is important. And we know we have readers out there for whom it is also important. So could we do an entire discussion on those readers that simply care zip about style and voice and tone and only want subject matter? Yeah, and we probably will. Because
so we're probably actually going to hear about it after this, because probably those people are like, well, we don't not care about voice. Like, what the hell are you talking about? So, like, which is fine. Come at us, because just because our perception of a situation is one thing does not mean it is right or the only thing.
That's right, because we're only two people in this entire
in our little COVID author bubble.
Right, and there are definitely going to be other authors and other readers out there that are going to come at it from the perspective of, yeah, of course, voice and tone and style are important to me. Subject matter, though, trumps. And I think we've seen it with some readers. Yeah, subject matter trumps. With some authors, subject matter trumps their, I don't want to say trumps their style, but they've catered their writing to the subject matter more than they have to the actual style and the voice. They want to write that particular subject matter over and over and over again. Sure, of course, every story is going to approach it from a different perspective, but that's what appeals to them as a writer. That's what they want to do. And God bless them. That is perfect for them. There is nothing wrong with it. It's for the within the context of what we're talking about tonight, though. It's a little different.
That is a totally valid way of existing in the author sphere.
Yeah,
like we just all have different ways that we want to go about this. I don't know if you want to call it a craft or whatever, but this type of art. Like I personally, I get bored. Which is, I do the thing you're not supposed to do, which is switching up like settings and genre. Not really genre, because it's always pretty much romance, but it's like, typically you're a contemporary romance author, or you're a historical romance author, or you're a paranormal. And I have shit all over the place. Like I did the thing you're not supposed to do, which is everything. I get so bored. I want to do different stuff.
Yeah, that's what they talk about. And I mentioned it earlier in the episode, is staying in your lane. And I made a point of saying that staying in your lane is a completely different subject from what we're talking about tonight. And I want to, now that you've brought it up, though, I want to say there is nothing wrong with writers who don't stay in their lane. And there are some really, really, really successful writers out there within our genre that haven't stayed in their lane, so to speak. By the same token, there are other authors who have had tremendous success by doing nothing but staying in their lane.
And those authors who don't, quote, stay in their lane and are successful are followed because of their voice.
Thank you. That's to me, and I know that someone can come back, and maybe someone will, and argue against that point of view, but sitting where I am tonight, right here, right now, I believe that's absolutely the case. That when an author doesn't specifically stay in their lane consistently, and they quote unquote go all over the map, I think that's what you said, their readership follows them not because they're staying in their lane or they're consistently writing about the same thing over and over and over again. They follow them because of that writer's voice. That's my opinion.
I agree.
It's not a fact. I'm not going to try to present it as a fact. It is an opinion, but I have a very strong opinion on that. And I have it not only as a writer, but as a reader, because I know in my case, that's why I gravitated to the writers that I have gravitated to. And you're a perfect example of that, Eris. You haven't stayed in your lane, and yet I love your voice. Yeah. The novels of yours that I have read that I love are not in, there's not a single one of them that is the same as the next novel. So Bass Ackwards is not even remotely close to the eighth house, is not even remotely close to a sinner in virtue, is not even remotely close to the last dominant.
Truth.
And
Truth.
So for me, I can sit here and argue that it has nothing to do with your lane. It has everything to do with your voice.
Well,
And
I'm glad that that's working out that way, because that was the only way I kind of resigned myself, but the way I decided to frame it for myself, instead of worrying about I need to stick to one thing, I'm just like, okay, but what is the common thread in all the things I'm doing? And when I figured out what that was, I'm like, okay, so there is a consistent thing, and that is the voice, and that's fine.
right.
I don't know if it's the voice or not, but even though I have different settings, I think thematically I have a lot of similar themes going on that people like, so I think that's what people are after too, not necessarily, it's got to be cowboys or it's got to be, urban fantasy or whatever.
Right, exactly. So, well, I don't know about you, but I think we've probably talked this to death. I hope that
we can make the words go. The writer.
Yeah. I hope that this is one of those episodes that, and I think we'll find out, that I hope it appeals. I know to a certain degree, people could argue, oh God, this is so esoteric. And this is, I just want to hear about sexy, sexy books. But as romance writers, this is one of those subjects that we can't, you can't make this, God, I hate to say this, you can't make this sound sexy. This is part of the craft.
I think it's a good insight.
Yeah.
Granted, I don't know how many people will be listening that aren't either romance writers or readers, but I kind of suspect that there's people outside of the romance landia that maybe don't think that we even have these thoughts as romance writers.
Yes.
Like, they think it's all like quivering members and, purple prose, and that's all we're doing, and that is not what is going on.
Right. You know what? And I think if I could walk away from this episode and future episodes that I'm sure will be much like this, and with only having convinced one person outside of the romance genre that might listen into this, that we struggle with the same things that you hear writers that are writing, traditional fiction stories or whatever, in what is supposed to be a trash genre, I would be happy, because
I'm proud of my trash.
and I'm proud of the craft of writing this trash, because it's not. It absolutely.
I think people just going to put that label. I don't want to get off another tangent, but people just put that label because there's the dirty sex in it.
Yeah, and it makes
tough beans.
Right, it embarrasses them, or it makes them feel uncomfortable. Again, subject.
But that doesn't mean everything around that is therefore devalued. Whatever. I don't want to go off on a tangent. Anyway.
Right. To get to the end, to the ends of the means, is the same no matter what we're writing.
Right.
We have to find a voice. We have to be consistent about our voice. We have to be consistent in that writing style. And when you put all those things together, it makes it successful. And, someday I'm going to be successful and be, proud of my writing style and my voice. I mean, I already am.
You should be proud in right now. And you are also successful right now.
And I'm just going to continue working on it because it's important. And
that's all we can do is keep working on it.
Right. And that's what I love to do. So with that, I'm going to say that's pretty much the end of our episode tonight.
Yes, I'm ready.
Yeah, you can find Not Safe for Work Romance Podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and YouTube. And you can follow us on Facebook and also on Twitter at Romance in SFW. That's Romance in SFW, all one word. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Just search for Shane Sterrett, or look for my group, The House of Sterrett. All of my books can be found on Amazon, available for Kindle, in Kindle Unlimited, and also in paperback.
And I am also on Facebook, where you can follow my fan page or join my private group, Eris Adderley's Home for Wayward Troublemakers. And I'm on Twitter at Eris Adderley. You can also find me on Instagram or TikTok. All my dirty books are on Amazon, most of them in Kindle Unlimited. Shane, shall we do this again next month? Another exciting romance writing topic?
I think we should. I'm really enjoying this. We're up to, or we will be up to 4 episodes.
4 whole episodes. And may I
know,
say
right?
that since this episode, according to our schedule, will be coming out mid-December, and we will be in the middle of 9 million different holidays, I would like to say happy holidays to everyone listening.
Yes, same for me. Thank you very much for bringing that up. I hope that everyone has a wonderful holiday season. And actually, the next episode after this one will be in 2021.
And we will be out of 2020. Thank goodness.
Thank God.
Right. All right, Shane. So I'll be seeing you next time.
All right, sounds good. Thank you, Eris.
Bye now.